Welcome to Linda's Corner. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about setting ourselves free and living heroically. I'm excited to welcome special guest Christian De La Huerta. Christian has 30 years of experience as a personal transformation coach. He is also an award-winning author and acclaimed international speaker in various settings, including the TEDx stage. His recent book, Awakening the Soul of Power, How to Live Heroically and Set Yourself Free, is the first book in his Calling All Heroes series, and it's receiving great reviews from psychologists, healers, life coaches, authors, and he even has an endorsement from Gloria Estefan. You can contact him at his website at soulfulpower.com or join his Facebook group, Unleash Your Inner Hero. And I'll include those links in the description. Welcome, Christian. I'm so glad to be visiting with you today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Linda. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. I'm so excited. I have to tell you, I just gobbled up your book. I thought it was delicious. And I actually had a couple books ahead of it that I was supposed to be reading, but I ended up finishing yours first, because this is a topic that just resonates with me and speaks to my soul. And I think what you have done is a fantastic job, probably one of the best in the genre, with its simplicity and its language and its illustrations and your analogies. Just make it easy to wrap your head around the objectives and the process. So very well done. Thank you for an excellent book.
Wow, I'm so profoundly touched, Linda. Thank you.
Oh, I am so excited.
Thank you so much.
So in your book, you use a lot of references to the hero's journey, which is explained in Joseph Campbell's book, Hero with 1,000 Faces. And this is such an excellent analogy to the process of discovery and self-healing. Like Bilbo Baggins in his book, The Hobbit, heroes kind of go through a process from living their ordinary life to accepting the call to adventure, and then eventually returning home as a better, stronger person. And each one of us is the hero of our own lives. We are the hero of our own story. And your book is a call to adventure, inviting people to go on an inner journey and slay their own fears and insecurities to become transformed into a better, stronger person. And what makes us better and stronger is the source that we choose to use for our power. We want to awaken our soulful power. Would you please explain the difference between egoic power and soulful power and how that makes us better and stronger people?
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to frame the book and the conversation. Thank you. What's interesting is that most of us have an ambivalent relationship to power. We want it, but we're afraid of it. And I think at the core of that fear is that we think we might abuse it and cause harm with it. And no wonder, because on any given day, all we got to do is turn on the news or even read through the headlines and witness at least one abuse of power. Combined with the fact that we've been conditioned to think power is a bad thing, it's a negative thing. So quotes like, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what good-hearted person wants to be corrupted or wants to abuse and cause harm? And what they forgot to tell us about that quote is that he was talking specifically about political power, not interpersonal power. Add to that mix the fact that we have been conditioned to make the emotions weakness. We hate confrontation. We run away from conflict. Put all that into the mix, and what happens is that we end up giving away our power. We end up saying yes when inside we feel no, and selling out for an illusion of security, for a false sense of security and acceptance, for morsels, crumbs of pseudo love, and it's not a good strategy. So what this book is about is like that there is a way that we can step into our power that doesn't require for us to do that kind of stuff, to push people down, step on them, put our knee to their neck in order for us to prop ourselves up and feel powerful. There is a way that we can express our power that is congruent with who we are. And so one of the most important steps towards that is learning that there's different kinds and understanding the different kinds of powers. So I talk about worldly power, or power of the ego, the way that the world relates to power, which, for most of us, we tend to think people who have money or fame, or they're high up in some kind of hierarchy, whether it's a corporate ladder or some other kind of institution or organization. But the thing about all those powers is that because they're outside of us, they're here today, gone tomorrow. The other kind of power, which is not hierarchical, and it doesn't believe that we have to push anybody down, is not threatened by other people having power, which I call spiritual power or soulful power, which is inherent to every one of us. It's inside each one of us. Nobody can give it to us. Nobody can take it away. Only we are the ones who can give it away for the reasons that we were talking about. And that kind of power is humble. It's not about like having an agenda like the other one does, like always trying to get something for itself. It doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. It just is. And it is quite mighty.
Oh, that's beautiful. It reminds me a little bit of the story of Moana, how there's the demon Te Kā who's all
Yes.
destructive and angry, and it's the same being that is the island goddess, Te Fiti, who also has power, but it's a calm, creative, beautiful, healing power. But it is powerful.
Yes. Yeah. Wisdom, spiritual wisdom by Disney, right?
Sometimes they get it right. What can I say?
They sure do. They often do. It's like I'm surprised by the messages in the animated films.
Yeah.
And the thing about that kind of power is that power is not inherently good or bad, right? It just depends on how we express it, how we use it, that it has a good or a bad effect. So it's a great image of that. Like the powers is theirs, like how we're going to express it. And the most important thing is that we realize that it is inside of us and that we get to choose how we express it. And that once we start understanding about ourselves, what makes us do the things we do, what our triggers are, what our behavior patterns and our relationship patterns are, the more aware that we become about ourselves and the stronger our sense of self, then the less that we need to prove anything by abusing power, which we know who we are and there's nothing to prove.
That is so beautiful. And wouldn't that be lovely if we all felt like we didn't have anything to prove and we could just be? And I love your comments about becoming aware. One of the things that I really appreciated in the book were your illustrations. There's a saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words and a symbol is worth 1,000 pictures. And by having these symbolic images, you're able to tell such a big story in a single glance. So is it okay if we talk about some of these pictures? That you have the bad guy who is Egolum, and
Of course.
he has multiple arms and sharp-pointed teeth and narrow slits for eyes and these tiny ears, and he's covered with armor and band-aids, and he's carrying items like a mirror and a mask and a big bag labeled past and a double-edged knife. Can you kind of explain this Egolum character?
Yeah, and of course that's like they spent the first third of the book, or at least a quarter of the book, talking about what the ego is. So we don't really have that kind of time to go that deep into it. But if we want to be free, and if we want to have the kind of relationships that we really long for, that with somebody who can actually match us, be a real match, and complement us, if we want to have a sense of personal empowerment, if we want to have a life that is filled with meaning and purpose, we've got to understand what the ego is. And there's so much confusion in the world about what the ego is. For most of us who know the word, we might think arrogance, inflated sense of self, and it is that, but there's so much more to it than that. So here's a great metaphor that kind of like another image that helps us understand what the ego is. If you put a baseball in the center of the stadium, that's what the ego is. Who we are is actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, tiny part of who we are to think that it is all of who we are, and to run the show, and to make really important, consequential choices about our lives, about our relationships, about all aspects of our lives, from its very small and always fear-based perspective. So in depicting the ego as Gollum, that refers to the inauthenticity of Gollum, who was something that we didn't know he was. And so the ego is always putting on masks. So I represented it too with multiple hands like a Hindu deity, and each of the hands is holding a different weapon. The image also shows how it's got a scar tissue and band-aids, and the ego has been through quite a few battles, and it's got all the evidence to show for it. That's where the bag of the past comes in, because it's holding a bag of the past. And so when somebody touches one of those unhealed areas in us in the present, and we react, and we maybe find one of their buttons and push it back, that they hurt us, we're going to hurt them back. What's actually happened, we're responding to previous similar situations from our pasts that we actually never healed. We never really got through it. And so that's what we're reacting to, so a previous similar situation. And so that's why it's not surprising to me that so many of us struggle with relationships, that more than 50% of marriages in this country end up in divorce, because we haven't been taught about how to approach them, how to hold them, and how to clear our past, how to heal our pasts, so that we can actually be here present in the fully present in the moment, rather than reacting to unhealed past traumas, and suppressed emotions from that we never navigated.
And that's why we have a tendency to respond with a mountain when really the event was a molehill. Because Exactly. We're not just dealing with that particular issue. We're dealing with that issue with every issue that it reminds us of in our entire past. And we're responding to all of those things. So the idea of holding on to that bag of past and the ability to be able to let it go, and how incredibly powerful that is.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much more that we could spend. Like when I do one of my retreats, we spend a good 2 hours just introducing the ego, and then we keep referencing back to it because it is so critical. Like a couple more things that are really important to note about the ego. It takes everything personally, right? So whenever somebody says or does something that hurts us, is because we have personalized it. If that wound wasn't there, like we could also respond to it just by noticing, what an interesting thing that they would think that. But no, we take it as a direct affront to our very identity, or more clearly, the ego does. So as we're on this journey, and then it reacts, right? The ego is all about reacting. And what we're going for, if we want to have a semblance of freedom in our lives, is reintroducing the element of choice. So just because somebody said something to us that hurt us, and then we react, we continue being at the effect, at the power of those people, because, and so there's no way we can be free. Because if somebody says something to me that I take personally, it could be anybody, it could be any one of the 7.5 billion people says it to me, I'm going to react in the same way because it's my button. So if we want to be free, there's no way around it. We've got to go into ourselves. We got to learn about ourselves, what makes us tick, what are our triggers, what are our patterns, so that we can heal those. And then anybody can press that button and nothing happens.
And that requires us taking the effort to work consciously, to make conscious choices. If we just go on autopilot, our subconscious just runs the program, and boy, it reacts to those buttons, every single one of them. So It takes a learning curve to be able to get into some conscious choice rather than that react and regret cycle that just comes so naturally, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I framed this book around the hero's journey, to go back to your original comment. Because it takes work. It's heroic work. To go around unconsciously, just reacting to what other people do, and taking everything personally, and being stuck in feelings of victimhood. It's like anybody can do that, right? But to take the time to go within, to look at ourselves, to maybe remember stuff that's not pleasant to remember, is not fun. But it is so worthwhile because once we do that, then we get to see the key to freedom and how we let ourselves out of the self-made prison of the ego.
Wow. And isn't that interesting that our prisons are self-made?
Yes.
And yet we, instead of trying to open the door and get out of our prison, we hang on to those bars for dear life, like it's protecting us, rather than that it is encaging and limiting us.
Yeah, yeah. I think in the ultimate analysis, it's trying to protect us, but in not a very effective strategy. Um, so, so let's take a relationship pattern for example. One of the things that we end up doing is sabotaging our relationships before we even get started with them by attracting people who are not a match, people who are not available. And it doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean we're better than or worse than. It means they're just not a match. They're not where we are. They don't have, maybe they don't share the same values, whatever the mismatch is. And of course, all of this happens subconsciously, which is, to add, to your point, is like so critically important that we become conscious about why we do the things we do. Because say I was working with somebody recently, and so many people that I have over the last 30 years that I've been doing this work. So in attracting the wrong people that we subconsciously know, the relationship is not going to work out. What we're doing is we're trying to protect ourselves from getting hurt, from getting abandoned, from being left alone again. But by attracting the wrong people, we ensure the very same thing we're trying to avoid. So it's not an effective strategy.
No. And those types of patterns are so much easier to recognize in somebody else than they are in yourself. Like, you can look at a friend and think, ooh, that's not a good choice. That is not going to make them happy. That is not going to work. But when you're doing it, it seems like a great idea, Yeah,
yeah. The blinders are on, that initial phase of falling in love, and the hormones are raging, and we just see everything through those rose-colored glasses of the honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
And then until they do something, they squeeze the toothpaste from the wrong end, or they do the toilet paper from the wrong way, which everybody should know it's, over the top.
I know, right?
The correct way.
Obviously.
Of course. Need we even discuss this? And then at that moment, like, the ego blinders come back up, and the honeymoon ends, and then we go, oh my, where did the love go? And we go searching for the next one.
Right. And something as simple as a toothpaste or a toilet paper roll can be a trigger that sets off a whole bunch of other things. Again, we make mountains out of molehills, and it's really easy to go there if we're in that reactive kind of a cycle. So another thing in the reactive cycle you had an image of that I just loved, and that was the extreme seesaw of power. It is so interesting because it's kind of counterintuitive, and yet it's so truthful. Would you kind of explain what that is?
Yeah, it goes, and it's also like a function of the ego, which goes from one extreme to the other. Like, the ego it's extreme, and it's a drama queen. And so, for example, and it gives our power away. So it's a beautiful day out, and we're on our way driving to yoga class or wherever we're going, to the office. Just singing along to our favorite playlist. We get to the office to the gym, and the nasty person on the front desk just says something to us the wrong way, and suddenly, boom, that's it. We either go into self-righteous indignation, and how dare you treat me this way? Don't you know who I am? Whether we say this or actually just feel it inside, or we plummet into failure. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I forgot my membership card again. What kind of person am I? I shouldn't be allowed to work out at this gym. I probably shouldn't be allowed to live on this planet, right? And we go from one extreme to the other on just a flip of a dime. And we give our power away to people who have even less of a clue. Power over our state of being, over our equanimity, over our inner peace. And again, not an effective strategy.
Right. And it's so interesting that it can go either way just as easily, from the I am dirt, I am nothing, I'm a loser, to don't you know? I mean, I should be treated like I am a goddess or whatever. And it can go just back and forth, even in the same day. You could even do it in the same conversation if you're just on a roll. That feeling of just that back and forth. It's just crazy, and it's so true.
It's insanity inside of our own minds. And the saddest part too is that harsh inner judge, which is the ego, is so cruel. Like, we are most cruel with ourselves. The things we say to ourselves, we would never say to anybody else.
Not our friends, not even strangers would we say the things that we say to ourselves.
Yeah,
I've been guilty of that.
We all have, right? It's part of what the ego does, and we all have one. And until we learn how it works, and then we can override it, we can transcend it, and we can cut out those behavior patterns. Like, I know them intimately. I know not only self-doubt intimately, I know self-hatred. My entire adolescence was one long depression. And these days, no matter what happens, right? So no matter the details of my life, the circumstances, a relationship works out or it doesn't. A project succeeds or it fails, in quotes. I never question. No matter what happens, I never question my self-worth. So I know, like, these teachings work, and this understanding of how what makes us tick, I know it works.
Isn't that beautiful? To know when you have truth, because it is consistent. And it's consistent regardless of the person, regardless of the circumstances, and regardless of where they currently are as far as their development. Because true principles work. Truth is truth.
Beautiful. Beautifully said.
And that's such a beautiful thing. And you talk a little bit about some of the ego power plays, which are our false sense of power, versus that pathway that leads to healing. And it's so beautiful. Do you want to share either of those? Some of the false ones or the true ones?
Yeah, some of them. These are like power strategies, ways that we're trying to rebalance what we perceive as an imbalance in power, but in, again, not very effective ways. Like, for example, revenge, which we've all done it at some point in our lives. And as I looked at revenge in relationship to power, I think that's what's going on when we take revenge on somebody else. We're trying to bring balance. You took something away from me, I'm going to take something away from you. Sort of like the old eye for an eye kind of thing. But like, to quote Gandhi, an eye for an eye, and the whole world goes blind. So it's not effective in the big sense of the word, because it just keeps growing and escalating, and it doesn't get us what we really want, right? Like, taking something away from you is not going to give me what I lost. And it's not going to give me what we all ultimately want, which is happiness, inner peace, a life that has meaning, purpose, and health, and all the good things that we want for ourselves and for our loved ones. It's not going to get us any of that. It might feel good temporarily, but it doesn't last. It doesn't last. And so they're not effective strategies. Passive aggressiveness is another one, which it is a power play when we think about it. I might be sitting, watching TV, and my spouse yells out from the kitchen, "Hey, honey, can you come help me out?" Yeah, and I'll be right there. 10 minutes later, "Hey, can you come help me in the kitchen?" Yeah, I'm right over. Just wait for the next commercial. That's what I'm saying, but inside, I'm like saying, "Screw you! Like, I'll come over when I'm good and ready."
Isn't that the truth?
"Oh, not tonight, honey. I have a headache." Right? That's what I'm saying. But inside, what's really going on is like, hell is gonna freeze over before you get any tonight. So
true.
Momentary, like, feels good, like feels like we're taking our power back, but it doesn't last, and it doesn't get us what we want.
No, it doesn't. And it also comes from that a little bit of fear of conflict, plus that I'm winning with this little battle that I'm going on in my head that you don't even know about. These power plays are so interesting. One of the power plays that I think is interesting because it doesn't sound like it's powerful, and that is the idea of victimhood.
Oh my my God, Linda, that is like the deepest one.
I know, right? Because it doesn't sound like it's a power thing, but it is. It's so
Yes.
crazy. Do you want to explain a little bit about why that one is such a big deal and why it's so hard to let go of?
It's the hardest one. It's like I've seen people who've come spend a whole weekend with me and they can't. They're not able or willing to let go of that. So that is the deepest and the hardest one to let go of. And here's the bottom line about that. As long as we're holding somebody or something outside of us responsible for our state of being, whether it's mom who did this or dad who didn't do that, or the teacher or the minister or society or sexism or racism or homophobia, as long as we're holding our sense of happiness and how our life is going because of that, if it only wasn't for that, then I would be happy, then I would be successful. We just gave our power away completely, right? We're making it contingent on something that happened or some system about which we can do nothing or very little. And so it's not an effective strategy either, because again, it keeps us stuck in that disempowered place of poor me, woe is me, if it only wasn't for that. And you could say there's teachings that say that at a soul level we choose everything. Like we choose that would mean that we choose cancer, divorce, the parents that we're born into, like even rape and sexual abuse. Like I don't know about that. I can't tell you that's the way the system works. I can go there hypothetically and I can say, well, I could see why we at a soul level give ourselves challenges so that we have to grow up and buck up against them and have something to buck up against so that we grow and evolve and transform and overcome these challenges. But I don't know that that's the way the system works. This I know for sure, without any doubt, that no matter what happened, no matter what happens going forward, because if there's one thing we can count on is that life is going to continue throwing curveballs our way. So no matter what happened, no matter what happens, we can always choose how we're going to be in response to that. And even at that level, just, all right, well, that sucked. It's not the way that I would have wanted. And, all right, well, how am I going to show up in response to that? That alone is, that question alone is empowering, rather than feeling stuck in the poor me, woe is me, if it only hadn't been for this or that.
That is fantastic. And that's the same conclusion that Viktor Frankl came with in his Man's Search for Meaning. The choice we have is our response. Yes. Now, some people don't want to get out of victimhood or get out of the woe is me, because with great power comes great responsibility. And as long as I'm the victim, I don't have to worry about anything, because that's somebody else's problem. And there's nothing I can do about it. And that's a sad place to be.
That's a really profound observation. And I think that's where I've landed also, that there is a payoff, right? There has to be a payoff for us to keep ourselves in victim mode. And I think that's the payoff, that we get to have an excuse for not showing up in life. Well, if it only hadn't been for that. If it only wasn't set up this way. And so we get to let ourselves off the hook. And again, it's not a good strategy because it keeps us stuck. Right. And it doesn't provide us the opportunity to free ourselves and overcome whatever it is that we need to overcome.
So we kind of get to choose our reward. And sometimes the rewards we choose are really dumb. Like if my reward is that I get to stay small and powerless because my win is that I don't have to make a choice, is not as fulfilling and joyful as the reward of owning and becoming and being happy and joyful and being able to create and contribute and make the world a better place. Those are more of the rewards that I want to go for.
Exactly. And that's what makes this work worthwhile, right? It's hard work. It's heroic work in some cases, because in some cases we gotta dive into and remember and feel stuff that we have in some cases spent a lifetime running away from. But we have to remember that those choices were made at a point in our lives when we didn't have the sense of self. the inner strength, the tools that we now have. So to be willing to do the heroic work of diving in and understanding why we do the things we do, the rewards that, like you're talking about, are infinite, than the infinitely more powerful. We're talking about freedom, like ultimate freedom. And so it far outweighs the benefit of staying comfortable.
Right.
Safe.
Which is why you have created this call to heroism, to becoming, to growing. And I really appreciate that, because it's a call that we all need. Whether or not we accept it is, I guess, up to us, but at least the call has been extended. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you say. You know, when you're right that I invite you to join me in making the world a better place by working on the only person you truly have the power to change, yourself. Exactly the same thing in different words.
Yeah, and that's what I believe. That's my thing. Well, Christian, thank you so much for visiting with me today. I have enjoyed it so much. I appreciate you sharing this invitation, this call to action, and your wisdom. It is very helpful, and I appreciate people who teach true principles. It makes me very, very happy. And so thank you for joining with me today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I enjoyed the depth of the conversation and look forward to more at some point.
Wonderful. I look forward to that. In closing, I would like to share a quote by Ralph Ellison. He said, "Power doesn't have to show off. Power is confident, self-assuring, self-starting and self-stopping, self-warming and self-justifying. When you have it, you know it." Today, I invite you to do one thing to begin to discover the power you have within. See you next time on Linda's Corner.